Hello, hello. How's that? That's so much better. Okay. I'm usually really, really loud, and so they underestimate. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kelly Haley, and I'm a reference librarian here at the Fayetteville Public Library. I want to thank all of you for braving the Fayetteville Spring Deluge to come out. And I also want to thank Pearl's Books for selling books in the lobby, Kyle Kellums from KUAF, and of course, our guest author, Eli Cranor. Yes. I have a tiny, tiny intro about him. I will not be very long. Eli Cranor was born in Forest City, and he grew up in Russellville playing football, I would say 90% of that time. After graduating from college and playing professionally for a while, he came back to coach football at Russellville High School, and one day in his office just hammered out the beginnings of what would become the Edgar Award-winning novel, Don't Know Tough. Next came a novel inspired by two murders in the Russellville area, Ozark Dogs, which was named one of the best crime novels of 2023 by the New York Times and The Guardian. Broiler, which is the book we're talking about today quite a bit, was named an Amazon Editor's Best Book of 2024. His latest novel, Mississippi Blue 42, debuts in August of this year. He's the writer-in-residence at Arkansas Tech, and his newspaper column, Where I'm Writing From, appears weekly in the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Our library has some book clubs, as you all know, and we read two of his books over the last 2 years, and we were drawn into these worlds with characters that sometimes were very familiar. And the stories actually were more often revealing. And to our delight, they were always unexpected, endings always unexpected. So please help me welcome Eli Cranor.
Thanks for being here.
So much for having me.
I always want to do this quick survey. I'm not trying to call anyone out, but I don't know how much spoilering I can do. Has everyone, are there people here who have read Broiler? Yes. Okay. Sorry for you folks who haven't.
So spoiler
I'm not gonna
alert.
give a lot away.
Yeah.
I won't give everything away, but I feel a little bit better. Before I talk about specifically Broiler, I want to talk about all three books, which I think are marvelous. There are crimes. There is a plot that moves, but it's the people that shape the book. And I'm wondering, is that where you start with the novels, the people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know where any of the, and that's a question that you always get, is like, where does the book come from? Where does your idea come from? And it got to a point where I used to just say Walmart. Like I used to but if you've ever read any of my columns or if you've ever heard me do an interview, there's a person I always mention, and that person is Johnny Wink. And if y'all don't know who Johnny Wink is, he was my professor. He took a guy who was the quarterback of the university and was majoring in English lit, like just because I thought I wanted to do law school. And this man has every Shakespearean sonnet memorized to this day. He's 80, he's in his 51st year teaching at Ouachita. And anyway, he just absolutely cast a spell on me. And he used to say, and he was quoting someone, I wish I could recall who it is, but an author is someone on whom nothing is lost. And so I think it's just kind of a part of, like you're always kind of looking and you're always kind of watching. And really, it's not so much about the idea or the character as it is about establishing a way to return to whatever world you're trying to create daily. And it's that snowball effect that, I'm big on. I think it comes from my sporting background. Like I'm big on the discipline of writing, and it feels now like a workout that like if I don't do it that day, I feel weird. And so it's just a part of me that that I have, and when I go, it's almost a subconscious thing. Yeah, I don't plot, I don't do any of that sort of stuff. It's just the fact of returning to it daily, and really at the same time every day. All the stuff comes from that practice.
Well, they say a quarterback gets better with reps.
Yeah,
Is that?
Well, I read this quote. So yeah, for those that don't know, I mean, football was a big part of my life. professional is in air quotes. It was in Sweden where I played my quarterback days. And then I coached high school football for 5 years. But I was an English lit major. I did do some creative writing there. Was always a reader. I was always the guy in the back of the bus with a book. And anyway, I read this quote when I got out of football. It was a Ray Bradbury quote where he said, "Or you're not a real writer until you've written 1,000,000 words." And man, I really took that to heart. And I think it was really, because it was about 7 years from when I got out of football, my whole life had been accustomed to a season, a practice, an off season, all these kind. And I didn't know what to do. Like when I got done playing and coaching, so I dove headfirst into trying to write. And the way that I did it was I kept a little moleskin journal, and I would keep up with my daily word count. And it really took about 4 or 5 years for me to hit 1,000,000 words of fiction, of prose, And so yeah, that's the approach that and I teach creative writing now, and of course, none of my undergrad students want to hear, the 1,000,000-word thing, but it's really a healthy way to think about anything. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, mentions the 10,000-hour rule. And I can't remember the exact math, but I remember breaking it down one day and figuring out about how long it would take me to write 1,000 words, and then kind of extrapolating that to 10,000 hours. And it's pretty close. Like Bradbury was saying the same thing that Gladwell was saying, like to go from a novice, someone who just picks up the guitar and wants to learn to play it, to someone who people would then pay you to come play at a bar or something. Like, the difference is 10,000 hours. Have you really put in that amount of time? And so when people ask me about becoming a novelist, one of my favorite, and I was mentioning him to you back there, is Larry Brown. Has anybody ever read Larry Brown, the great Mississippi writer? He's a fireman, no college education, just decided one day he wanted to write books, and he holed himself up. And he used to lay bricks, and there's this great documentary called The Rough South of Larry Brown, where he says writing a sentence is just like laying bricks. You start off and they're all wonky, and you can't get the mortar right, but then after however many years, you start to lay those perfectly straight lines, and that mortar starts. And it's the same with writing. And for me, we were talking about this a little back there too. The line is what is most important to me in writing. I like to hear the line. So, yeah.
Broiler is set here in Northwest Arkansas, Detmer Poultry. We've got 4 people, more than 4, but the 4 protagonists are connected. And I want to talk about that, but you also in the acknowledgments thank students in your first block class who were falling asleep, and now you know why. Is that because they were working overnight?
Totally. Yeah, so that's a story worth telling, and you asked where the things come from, characters or the story. And for me, that's where this one came from. So when I got out of coaching, I ended up teaching ALE, Alternative Learning Education, which they were all my students. It was an offshoot of the regular high school in Russellville. If you asked those students, they would have told you that they were there because they were the bad kids. It wasn't necessarily true. Now, some of them definitely had behavioral problems, but they were there for a lot of reasons, and a lot of it had to be with the fact that they were seniors and they needed one more semester to make up, And anyway, my first year there, I come in, and there are 2 Hispanic students in the back corner who, no matter what I did, they would not wake up. And we had these long blocks. So a block was like an hour and 20 minutes. And I'm playing guitar, and I'm bumping their desk with my thigh, trying not to be too obvious. But they're out. And so I remember going to my principal and saying, hey, man, I can't get these kids to wake up, And he's like, oh, well, they work night shift at the chicken plant. Wow. And he was like, and to his credit, he was like, you probably just need to let them sleep. You probably just need. And so I was writing books at that time, but I was still in those 1,000,000 words. And I really think, and so this is when, it's a weird thing. When Don't Know Tough came out in 2022, I already had drafts of Ozark Dogs and Broiler, written. So that's been a big kind of secret sauce behind why these books have all come out.
Right.
And so in my, y'all might have heard Zen mind, beginner's mind. Like for a beginner, you know, there is no obstacle too high. And I was a beginner at that point, and I thought, ooh, this is a story worth telling. I knew I wanted to write Arkansas stories, and so when they did wake up, I started to ask them questions, you know, and it was those kind of primary interviews, primary sources, that led to the shifts that really had no. It was just whenever the trucks got empty. So they might get off at 7:30, not take a shower, and just ride their bicycles, you know, straight into, and then the 40 degrees and the plastic and the bacterial spray, the metal mesh glove, and all those details were things that they had told me. And so, yeah, that was where that book first started kind of noodling around.
In the first paragraph or two, we meet Gabriella, and she's taking off a diaper.
Yeah.
We don't know why yet.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is that a detail that you found out through research?
Yeah,
getting
so
ready?
it was a really good time, and there's also a really good book, The Death of the American Worker. That book really details, through nonfiction, all of this. I mean, if you want to dig deep. But it was a kind of a perfect timing when I was writing this, because it's when a lot of the strikes were starting to happen. And so there was a lot of research that you could just find, you know, that previous to that point, it was a lot harder to find. So that's where that detail came from.
What sort of research, I guess, do you feel comfortable with or feel like you have enough of when you're writing about
Totally.
fictional people, but the real people too?
Totally. Yeah. So on any project, I like to do a certain level of research in order to get comfortable, in order to feel like I know the world. I've joked before that I need to set a book in like Italy, because then I might, you know, really take a research trip. But what I find a lot, and this goes from my students or to people who reach out to me and ask about writing, is oftentimes I see writers the research becomes a stumbling block to creating a narrative. So here's what I mean, is like I'll have people say, I've been researching this thing for 5 years. And at that point I'm like, okay, you need to write the thing that like you know. And so for me, I like to do a base level where I can, even something like those conversations can give me enough of a world to start in. And then I'm lucky now to have an editor, or to, like for this book specifically, my editor's name's Juliet Grames. She is bar none the smartest person I know. And throughout this book, and when I like the draft that I sent her, she would go through the margins and she'd make a note in the book, needs more chicken porn. Needs more chicken porn. That's what she would write. And what she was saying was like needs more like chicken like the actual So now what you've done, we need a fact here is what she was saying. We need this needs to be, and really, when you're writing a novel, when you're writing a piece of fiction, the story is paramount. You know, the story, and so you have to be able to have enough knowledge to write a story. And then when you can go back in and figure out where you need those real details, that's for me when and now your research is pointed, and you're not learning a bunch of extraneous stuff that never gets used in the book, but you need it to work in the story here or there.
I don't know if you develop relationships with the characters. I do. And sometimes I wonder why one character is my favorite and one is not. Like, I loved Gabriella. Mm-hmm. I couldn't stand Luke from the minute I met him.
Yeah.
He's the executive or on the rise. But nobody's clean in your novels. No one's all good. Almost nobody's all bad.
Yep.
But you give us reasons why they might be bad.
Right.
How, the four main protagonists with Broiler, Mimi, Gabriella, Edward, and Luke, how did you decide what level to give them?
That's a good question, and I ascribe, this is by no means an original thought. I think everybody from Dostoevsky to Quentin Tarantino have said something along these lines that, you know, we're all the hero of our own story, you know, and so this was something else he and I were talking about back there, but I never read a lot of genre fiction when I was coming up. Like, even as a kid, one of my favorite things to read in middle school was, y'all remember those permabound, like, classics? Does anybody remember these abridged classics, like the permabound classics? Yeah. And I loved those things because I could say I'd read Moby Dick or whatever, you know. And so the point of what I'm trying to say is that I wasn't used to, like, a thriller novel or something where there's like a diabolical person, you know, that was never. So the way that I ended up getting into the crime world was that I wrote Don't Know Tough, and then it came out and it through a crime imprint, you know, like they were like, I was reading Larry Brown, Harry Crews, Flannery O'Connor, Jesmond Ward, like that. And so then I was like, well, I better go do some homework in the crime world, and started reading a lot of crime. But I feel like for those books to work, it has to feel real, and that's how real people really are. So I do try to, at least if someone is a bad guy, to at least try and give a reason, you know, some sort of backstory to why they are. And this was something you mentioned earlier that I talked about researching the chicken plant part of it. But even characters like Edwin and Gabby, there was a certain level of research. This book, for me, was I had to cross a lot of gaps in this book that I didn't have to cross in terms of, like, Don't Know Tough or Ozark Dogs. And Juliet, again, to her credit, she said something to me one time. Like, when I first sent this book in, I was like, I think this is the third book. And she read it, and again, I don't know that I'd have ever written Broiler if I had been in the publishing world. So let me unpack that. Like, I wrote this book before I ever had a publishing deal, agent, editor, anybody telling me what you should do or shouldn't do. I wrote a book about the chicken processing industry, motherhood, and miscarriage. You know, like, that's really what the book's about. And I wrote this book, and again, in that kind of Zen mind, beginner's mind state, you know, that you can do whatever. And so that was another big thing. She was like, Eli, you know, when you were going to write Edwin and Gabby, she's like, I think you can do this. And she's like, it's going to be a challenge. And this was the line that I ended up writing on like a note card and taping to my computer. She said, meet the challenge with love. She said, you can do it as long as you meet the challenge with love. So I think that really, when you're thinking about characters, even your bad ones, even as long as you love them like their mother would, you know, and treat them with that, it really helps kind of form how you tell their story.
Each one of those four protagonists seems to be tinged with some form of the cliche, the American dream. You know, Gabby's keeping in the notebook how much overtime they didn't get. And she has that 7-year plan. Luke wants to climb the corporate ladder. Mimi wants security. And Gabby, God, I just love Gabrielle. I just love her so much. She wants the child that she couldn't have because she couldn't stay hydrated on the line. And she wants her family, Edward, her unborn future child, all to work there, to work it out. So there's this tinge of an American dream, but you have this great line in there that there's a corresponding nightmare. Everyone's desperate in this book. And I don't think you can really read this book and not come away with some sort of empathy for people you don't know.
Yeah.
And that's one of the best things you can do in a novel.
Well, that means a lot to me, because I believe that books, like Stephen King has the great quote, books are uniquely portable magic. And if you want to put down an Eli Cranor quote, I believe that books are empathy machines. They're more so than moving images on a screen. Books allow you to get into the heads of people that do not look like you, that are not from where you're from. They allow you, and so because of that, like, I had a lady one time at one of the early Broiler events, and I'll just be frank, like, Broiler has been the hardest book for me to go around and talk about in a lot of ways, because people read the book and I don't know that they think, like, I had one lady tell me, like, I had to keep flipping to the back cover and be like, looking at your picture and like, did you really write this? Which in one way I took as a really big compliment. because I do believe in the power of imagination, and I do believe it's an author's. Because I'll say this too. I had people along the journey of this book tell me to change certain characters, you know, to take certain things out, to maybe make it safer, you know. And what I told her, this person, was that wouldn't be the story. Like, you know, like you couldn't tell the story. Like, it's important for me to try and tell it like it is, like, or at least how I see it, you know. So back to the empathy machine, I had a lady ask when the question portion of this came open. She was like, well, what did you learn writing this book? You know, how did this book change you? Which, if reading a book is an empathy machine, then writing it, and like you said, like living with those characters daily, it's completely transformational. And I'll say this, like, you said the word desperate a second ago, and when the students were in my classroom and they were sleeping and I was getting that story, as interesting as it all sounded to me, as fertile ground as it seemed for like a narrative, I also was like, but how are you going to tell that story? You know, like how I didn't want to write an expose on the crime. And so I really kind of tabled it. I mean, I didn't want to write an expose on the chicken processing. So I kind of tabled it for a little while. And then it wasn't until, and my wife traveled around with me for the opening part of this tour. And my wife pole vaulted at the U of A. She's more of a jock than I am. Like, she's a very reluctant first reader. She always will read my books, but she's very reluctant. But for this one, she read like every 25 pages and really was involved for obvious reasons. I wanted her opinion. So she traveled around with me as I was trying to talk about Broiler. And it's always hard trying to talk about 80,000 words, you know, in 30 minutes or however long you have. And we got through the first couple of events, and afterwards she was like, Eli, you're forgetting to tell the other part of this story. And the other part of the story, and she said, and the big word is desperation. And that's the word that you said, and that's really the word. And so what happened, and this is just personal, but it's a part of this story, and it's in the things, is between our two kids, my wife and I endured, and she suffered 2 miscarriages. So we went through this. So that part of the book was like straight from it. And this is, again, you asked where the stuff comes from. It's a strange sort of alchemy, because there was something in my mind, I think that was as desperate as we had ever felt. And there was something about that new parenthood, the experience we just shared, that I thought there's some sort of metaphor or parallel here that's going to work with that other part of that story. And so it was that weird kind of thing that led. And the reason I bring all the thing up about her, the lady asking, what did you learn, is to get to write that and then give it to my wife at every 25 pages, you know, and see. And, you know, it's not necessarily a feel-good story. I mean, maybe by the end it has more, but that experience for us was the best form of marriage counseling, you know, that you could ever like talk about catharsis. Like, yeah.
I'm not going to give away the very, very end, but the last, sort of the epilogue, perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I love that it wasn't more saccharine or sugary.
Yep.
It was the way it should be.
And Kyle, and I've heard that from so many people, and I always felt that way. And I'll tell you who really felt that way was my wife. Like, she put her foot down, because once the book goes in, not just Juliet Graham's my editor, but there's a bunch of other people who end up reading it, and there was a contingency of people who thought that was too, like it was too happy, you know, that it was too, and they really, if you've read the book, they wanted me to end it with Gabby in the rain. So I'll say, like, if you've read it, like Gabby in the rain, they wanted to cut it right there. And my wife is really good about why I love her as a first reader is because she really represents the wide middle. You know, like I love to read like strange things, right? But she reads like the big books that come out like always. Like so I love it. And like if she likes it, I'm like, okay, well then maybe it'll fall in. And she was like, Eli, you have to like show what this comes out. So she was like, you cannot cut that final restaurant scene.
But you were fair to Gabby. She didn't,
Yeah.
you know, it was like,
Yeah.
she got what she deserved.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah. She made it.
I promise I'll leave time for y'all to ask questions. I've got so many. I'm so excited about this. I want to ask a couple of things about, one is the title, broiler. If you grew up in Arkansas, you know what a broiler is. You don't have to think about that at all. Was there any discussion with Soho Crime about the title?
No, and titles are weird. Like I'll tell you the story on all of. I mean, Don't Know Tough was the title. When I wrote that story in there in that prep period, there's a line in that opening chapter which he says, he don't know tough, he don't know nothing. And when I read that, I was like, Don't Know Tough, like that's it. Ozark Dogs had about 10 different titles. It was, originally it was Salvation, playing off the salvage yard. It was Some Die Crushed. It was, there was a bunch of, and honestly, Ozark Dogs was something that they came up, like it was like Ozark, the Netflix series was playing and the dog play, and so it became that. Broiler was one that I honestly had like from the start. Like I felt like a pot boil, like, and then the broiler and the chicken. And yeah, my grandpa growing up in Arkansas, talk about everybody knowing chicken, world. I remember driving around and we'd drive past a chicken house and I'd be like, oh, Pop, that smells like poop, and y'all probably know what he's gonna say. He said, no, son, that smells like money, which is a great platform a great foundation for which the book probably was birthed, in the seeds in my mind.
Was there any, it's set in Northwest Arkansas, most of it in Springdale, at a chicken processing plant. There are chicken processing plants in Springdale. Were there any conversations about what you would title the chicken processing plant or company?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wasn't ever going to take a big swing at the real ones. No. But no, Detmer just sounded like it fit. I mean, there's really, I do, in my phone, I keep a list of names. And this is always fun. Because, I mean, I'll collect these off like billboards or hell, I mean, being the teacher, I get a roster, every fall and spring now, and so this is just a couple of things. So some of them are just phrases that I like. So like No Go Arkansas is at the top of the list. High as the grocery bill. Blackjack Baptist Church. High speed come apart. Y'all know that saying? I'm about to have a high speed come apart.
I love that.
Oh, I know. There's a lady that works with my wife who said that the other day, and my wife has learned the drill now. She comes home, she's like, Eli, high speed come apart. I'm like, yep. Between Jail and Jesus. And then I always keep a list of band names. Like if I were, and they're not always band names, but they're like if I need a band name. So here's my band names. Septum Ring, Tretinoid Purge, Prevnar 13, Mexican Car Seat, the Pink Spittoons, Chat Pile, Ice Nine Kills. And then here's my names of like characters. Nate Tinbarge, William Earl Williams, Smurf Darrow, Kennedy Corona, Butler Benson, Boots Radford, Kershaw Estes, Steely Beard, Uncle Jar, Sholanda, Granberry, Pickford. But as you can tell, like it goes on, and I mean that was just the top of the list. So
Uncle Jar.
Uncle Jar.
That's
good. Yeah. So feel free to poach those if any of y'all are writers out there.
In Broiler, one of the big things that moves it along is the kidnapping. So they're the big scenes, but the small scenes or the smaller scenes are just as important, I think, for me as a reader.
Yeah.
And two that I loved, the Sunday morning, Sunday midday margarita party unannounced.
Yeah.
And then when Luke wants to get his stash to try to get enough money to get his son back, and it's not there, and he can't figure out why, and then Terry the receptionist.
No, everybody does like Terry the receptionist, yeah.
And just how that played out, and I could so visualize the panic and the anger, and then it's sort of this benign, helpful solution. when you're putting those little scenes together, are you thinking about how they can propel the story and how they tell us a little bit more about the person?
I really think I said that I don't outline, and I really think that those sort of scenes come from that practice. Because a lot of the time, I've tried in the past. I've tried to it'd be a so much more easy way to do it. You know, like, oh, I know what's gonna happen. I could just, but what you lose is you kind of lose that that tightrope feeling. Like if you already know the story, then you're almost like you're just filling in the blanks. So when I go down there in my office, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, still dark outside, have the same routine that I always do. I mean, I really try and trust like the process and never steer it, you know, like, so sometimes those things, they really happen spontaneously. And then I don't know why, you know, I don't know what the margarita party is gonna be or why, but then and that to me is when the most organic and authentic writing comes from. A lot of those other small moves also come in hindsight. They do also come once the story's there, and maybe you had this weird margarita party, but it didn't really do anything. But now you know you have to make a move, and so you use that party as a setting and come back in. I mean, Hemingway said writing is rewriting, and he's really true. I mean, it only takes me. I'm crazy. I mean, again, like hear me when I say I don't think a lot of. And you don't have to be this way if you're a writer, but it takes me about 90 days to write a rough draft, but it's because I just do not stop. You know, like I do it every day, and I don't stop until I'm done. And if you write like 1,000 words a day, which is usually what I get in 2 hours, then you've got 90,000 words, you know, at the end of 90 days, and they're all horrible, mostly. Like it is really. I mean, people call it a puke draft, they call it a whatever, and so I try to then take a week, 2 weeks, maybe write a short story, do something different, and then I come back to it. And I've heard somebody explain it as like that first draft is like you are just getting the sand in the sandbox.
Right.
And with the second and the third and the fourth draft, you then start to build the castles and the things. So that's why I don't plan, because I'm kind of telling myself that story in the first way. And that's where the weird stuff kind of comes, the small and the weird. But I also have one other thing, and if y'all have ever, I'd say this in almost every interview, but it's worth saying. It's the final stage of my like drafting process, so the rough draft process. I write in the morning, go throughout my day, and then we have 2 kids, 8 and 5. They go to bed. So really everything is built around staying away from them, you know, when it's the creative writing process, because it's early morning, and then they go to bed. And then what I do is I call my mom at night. And I still do this. And so what I do is just whatever I've written that day, the 1,000 words that I've gotten, and it could just be the middle of a scene, it could be, but I read them aloud to my mom over the phone at night. And here's why that's important, is because it's important for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons is because I don't plan, as I read it aloud, it allows me to hear, A, it's great for editing, but B, I kind of think, oh, like this might be where it goes in the morning. And I do jot little notes like about what the tomorrow morning will be. But the real secret sauce of why this is so just absolutely imperative to my process is because every night when I finish reading, and again, remember, this is the rough draft. This is the puke draft. This is not very good. My mom always says the same thing. And what she always says is, Eli, honey, that is the best thing I have ever heard you write. And I say, thanks, Mom. And I hang up. And when I go to bed, I'm thinking, this is really good, you know? And then I wake up and the alarm goes off at 5 and I'm right back at it again.
Oh,
so,
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And okay, about to open up to questions here. One thing I loved about the margarita party scene, I was rooting for Mimi and Gabby to become friends, to be a force together, which wouldn't have been right, I think. And I think that scene really told us the aftermath. It's not going to, they can be cordial to each other.
Yeah.
But they're never gonna get.
Yeah,
to be
that's
close
that's
friends.
it's a great read of it, man, and I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you doing this and doing this with the amount of detail, because that's not always the case. And I've done a lot of interviews where the person sitting right here has obviously not read the book, and Kyle's read all 3 of them. And oh, my phone's talking to me. And so, yeah, man, I really appreciate the small details. Because, yeah, again, this is something my dad called and said to me one time. I think it was after Ozark Dogs came out, which, by the way, is dedicated to him. And he told me, he said, son, I guess I'm going to have to read that one because you dedicated it to me. And everybody's going to ask me what it's about, you know. But so he read that one. And he said, man, you know, why do you have to set them in Arkansas? And what he was saying is like, he thought I was like crapping on Arkansas, you know? Any of y'all familiar with Barry Hannah?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. So a lot of my buddies went to Ole Miss and got their MFA and studied under Barry Hannah. And they have a great quote that I've heard him say a couple of times in different ways. But Barry used to say, I'll say anything, I'll read anything, and I will write anything as long as it's true. Now, again, truth is subjective, whatever. But for me, I know that I'm taking, you know, some stabs at what I see of Arkansas. But I do so from a place of love, like what Juliet said, because in our state, there's a lot of stuff that I would like to see better. I would like to see changed. So if my books are a chance to shine a light on that for people who are maybe living in a bubble that don't have any idea that that's going on, then, you know, Dad can get over it.
Any questions? Oh boy. We have a microphone that'll come here. Kelly. Yeah.
Who's first?
There. Then we'll go to Amy, and then we'll go to.
Excuse me. Yes, I had a question about Ozark Dogs.
Yes,
In
ma'am.
the foreword to your dad, you say, for Dad who taught me how to write with a bucket full of baseballs. I would like you to explain that.
Well, how do you write with a bucket full of baseballs? I say. So not only did Dad, I'll get to the baseballs, but my dad was, I was going into my 5th grade year, summer before 5th grade. And I think he thought, my parents were both elementary school teachers. And I think he thought that I was becoming a little bit too much of a jock. And so I remember like coming into, waking up, and I was ready to go get on my bike. We lived in a neighborhood in Russellville, and that's all I did was go outside. And he stopped me at my bedroom door, and he threw one of those black and white marbled composition notebooks on my bed. And he said, son, before you come out of this room every morning, you're going to read 20 pages of any book you want, and you're going to write one handwritten page about whatever you've read. And so he made me do that every summer until like I started high school. And so part of that is that by the time I got to high school, I was one of the better readers and writers. Mm-hmm. You know, just like if you're always growing up dribbling a basketball, and it's the same thing. If you're the fastest kid in class, what do you like to do? You like to run. If you could throw a football farther than anybody else, what do you like to do? So he gave me that. But the baseball thing is he was the same sort of disciplinarian, like crazy about all things. And so he used to make me throw 100 strikes a day. Pitches. He used to make, like, when I was a kid playing baseball, I was a pitcher. And so his thought was, well, I'm going to make, and he called these strikes. So he would sit on this bucket, like a 5-gallon bucket, and we would go to Pensacola. And like in the morning before all the other kids and family are out on the beach, we're out in the parking lot throwing 100 of these strikes. And I hated it, you know, and I'd bounce balls off the concrete, and we broke Mom's van window, and I would, you know, I would get so mad at him and really butt heads with him. But lo and behold, it was that sort of kind of doggedness that this is a daily, like if you want something, it takes 10,000 hours. It takes 1 million words. It takes 100 strikes. That's where that came from.
Thank you for not ending with the rain, but the backpack was the release for several people in the end.
Yeah.
The ill-gotten money that Luke stole, I'm gonna give that part away,
Yeah.
may have funded the escape,
Yeah.
but the backpack was the aha moment for Gabrielle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Totally.
wonderful book, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Question here. And then you.
Hey, Eli.
Hey.
I'm just sitting over here with my mouth hanging open. You guys have really heard parts of the first story that became the first book. And after he read that day, I just walked up to him and said, "You're gonna make it." He's good.
We were in Fayetteville at Nightbird Books like 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and it had come out in a short story in the Greensboro Review, the first chapter of Don't Know Tough. And I was so hungry, and so I'd like called the book. I was like, I have a short story published. Can y'all let me read this at this? And they did, and she was there.
It was just something. But one of the things I want to ask you about, I love you when you're talking about your process. I wonder if when you're in the midst of writing, you know, that first 90 days or whatever, and just throughout your process producing something, do you, I know of some writers who won't read anything else during that time, and then there are other writers that do, and I'm wondering, which are you? Do you read books by people while you're actively writing your book, or are you one of those people that goes, oh no, I can't do that?
Good question. No, totally. I have to read all the time. Like part of, well, yes, I tell my students, you are what you eat. And reading, that means you are what you read. But I have to read their stories, which, you know, are often, if you're worried about it impacting your writerly skills, you know, like their stories might have a chance of bringing you way down, you know, sometimes. And I read constantly. And the one thing that I do, even on the opposite of that, is before I start writing at all, I read passages from my favorite books, like just to kind of get that rhythm in my head. I just will have a stack, and I'll have, you know, I mark all the books that I read. So I'll just flip it open to a section that I marked, and I'll just read for 5 or 10 minutes just to kind of get your mind warmed up and in that rhythm. A person that Kyle and I were talking that is absolutely, this is a person that I found once I had been deemed a crime writer, and I was like, I got to read crime novels. And really, it's where I've just stayed. I've read all 42 of his novels, including the Westerns. It's a guy named Elmore Leonard.
Oh, yeah.
So if you've seen this television series Justified, he had a string of movies. He had a whole bunch of movies, some of them not so great. But Elmore Leonard wrote the short story 3:10 to Yuma, which is an absolute masterclass in short stories, and I teach it. He has 10 rules to writing, which are really interesting if you're a writer. But Elmore Leonard writes like jazz. I mean, he has his line by line has got lyricism and just a pure kind of rhythm to it that I try to emulate, you know, in everything I do. Like, to me, his writing is the writing that I want my writing to sound like and to feel like. So that's what I read. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
Are you going to talk about Mississippi Blue?
Oh, well, I'm glad you mentioned it, actually. Thank you. And I'll pay you after the thing. Yep.
I didn't realize it wasn't out yet. I
No.
planned on buying it.
So I do want to talk about it because if you can't tell what that is, but you could probably even tell from the cover that it's a different sort of thing than what I've done with my first 3 books. Much more in that kind of, like if you watch the Coen brothers, like how it's a little bit offbeat with a little bit of dark humor. So what it is it's a fictional federal investigation into big money college football in Mississippi. And the protagonist is a rookie federal agent named Ray Johnson. Her actual name is Raider Indigo Johnson, and she's the daughter of a big-time football coach from Arkansas. So Ray is first in her class at Quantico. She's a total badass. And fresh out of the academy, she's thinking she's going to be doing Joint Terrorism Task Force, all this other stuff. But of course, where does she get sent? To do a white-collar crime investigation about a big college football powerhouse in Mississippi, because they think with her dad, she'll know, how to get in there. And so long story short, this book sold for a 2-book series, so at least there'll be 2 of them. This one, if you're interested or knowledgeable about the NIL and all that stuff, this book is set in a time period where 2013, 2014, where all these things were brewing that I think led to. So you got Hugh Freeze and that whole thing that happened at Ole Miss. You've got the Ed O'Banion NCAA case. You've got the EA Sports video game, which is part of the Ed O'Banion case. You've got Johnny Manziel. You've got Jameis Winston. Oh, wow. All these things, of course, have all been fictionalized in this. But and I tell people, they're like, well, why did you switch to this? Because it's going to be more like Elmore Leonard, or maybe people have said Carl Hyacin. If you read any Carl Hyacin, how he takes like a political thing and all. I've done it with football, but to me, if you're tackling the pageantry of college football, you can't. It needs to be funny, Like if you really look at it, like you gotta have. So anyway, I wanted to do this. This is something I've done at other events. I get a few of these sent to me, and I've still got a few left back at the house, but I brought this one for y'all. So here's what I'm gonna offer, is if you are willing or interested in me mailing you a copy of this, then what you need to do is by, we'll say like midnight tonight, which you'll probably do it in the next hour if you're interested, but just pre-order it from wherever you buy books. You can pre-order it from Pearls, you can pre-order it from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever, however you get your books. Take a screenshot and email it to me, eli.cranor@gmail.com. Just eli.cranor. And then send me your address, all in this one email. And if you want me to say something in there, like if you want me to say whatever, Downset Hut, then I'll sign it, but I'm only going to send it to one of you. So you see, it's like a raffle. So they do that. So you pre-order the book. You will get a copy on August 5th. And then one of you lucky entrants will get an early copy, an copy edited edition, to probably next week, if you're interested. So if you want to do it that way. I will say, are any of y'all familiar with John T. Edge? He does the SEC Network.
Yeah.
True South is his show on SEC Network. He just wrote in he had read this book. He lives in Oxford, which, if you can't tell, like, it's not Oxford. It's actually called Compson, Mississippi. And it's the University of Central Mississippi. But let me find this, because I was really, really scared that I didn't know how the Oxford folk were going to respond to this book. But here's what John T. had to say, because I really think he summed it up better than I can. So here's what John T. had to say, if you're interested. He says, and do y'all know what an opera buffa is? I didn't either. It's like a comedic opera. Okay, so here's John T. Edge. Eli Cranor has written a brilliant opera buffa for the Deep South, set in red zones and blues bars and Waffle Houses, borrowing plot lines from Tommy Tuberville and Robert Johnson, pulling characters from William Faulkner and Robert Penn Warren. His gonzo writing delivers big laughs and bigger questions about our beloved game day rites and rituals. So if you're interested, EliCranor.com, a screenshot and your address. And if you want me to say anything else, then one of you will get this. And maybe if only one of you does it, then you'll be the one that gets it.
Me.
Yeah.
I want to turn from your writing and your stories about your writing to a larger political picture.
Okay.
Did you get any pushback at all, either through reviews or in person or by notes late at night on Broiler?
Well, yes. I mean, I get maybe you wouldn't be amazed, but I'm still kind of amazed at the things that people send me, you know, about different things, about all sorts of stuff. But politically, not really for Broiler, no. I mean, I'll tell you the things that get people most riled up is my weekly column for the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. You know, it's the fun, I mean, and it might not be the things that you think would be. I could write about a restaurant, you know, or something, and where I am, and if they've been there and I got one little fact wrong, then they're jiving in to say, you don't know anything about, but no, I mean, I've been, honestly, like I said, when I was out on tour for the first week or two, I was hesitant about how to wade into the waters and talk about all this and talk about all of it. But no, nothing crazy. Nothing crazy.
Are they tending to dismiss you as a fiction writer?
Right. Well, I will dismiss myself as a fiction and say it's all fiction. It's all just a story, you know, when need be.
He's going to sign books here in a minute. There are copies of all three of Eli Cranor's novels out there from Pearl's Books. We got maybe time. Does anyone have? Oh, shoot. I'm going to make. Okay, we got time for two. We got.
I have a quick question.
Okay, we got time
Quick.
for three.
Eli.
Yes, ma'am.
When I started at the university in the late 60s, I had a graduate assistant instructor whose name was John Wink. And I have long been curious if your Johnny Wink could be that same.
He's got to be, because Johnny is from Gulfport, Mississippi, but he got his PhD at Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas, and was a graduate assistant, and then somehow, he always jokes, he's like, you know, this liberal hippie has somehow survived at Washita Baptist hiding in the English department, you know, all these years. And that's him, yeah, 51 years later. He's been at Washita.
Mr. Wink.
Mr. Wink.
Johnny to it.
And did you happen,
John.
well, I was trying to think, so Susan Wink would have been his wife, but she probably wouldn't have been, they weren't married at that time, they met there. She was also there.
Well, I've wondered.
Well, I'll ask him if he'll probably remember. He probably had a nickname for you.
Oh.
No? Okay.
I will go there and then there.
Hey, I was just curious how many hours of sleep you get on average.
Good question, man. No, that's really funny because I ask that a lot. Like, I'm so interested in routine. And if any of y'all are interested in craft stuff, there's a book called Daily Rituals has anybody ever heard of that? Daily Rituals? It takes like artists of all stripes, like painters, sculptors, and writers, and it talks about how they formatted their life to try and do this thing. But I usually go to bed at 10:30, and I get up a little before 5. And I'm pretty crazy about that. But I was meeting with y'all all know Baz, the radio guy on the Buzz, or with David Basil. Mm-hmm. And I asked him that same question because he does that morning show. And he said for the last 30 years, he slept on average 4 hours a night. He goes to bed midnight to 1 and gets up 4:30-ish.
That's not good. Oof.
Yeah. Did we have one more?
We did? I thought there was one more question? Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got a couple of your books. I apologize. I've not read it.
Reading it.
I've not read any of them yet, but obviously they're on the list. So would you say you're fictionalizing what are true events for the most part when you write?
Oh, I think any writer does that
Yeah.
to some degree. Like I remember when Don't Know Tough came out, I had 6 different players call me and be like, the main character's Billy, and they're like, am I Billy? And the truth of the matter is they're all Billy in some form or fashion. You pull and you twist and you turn. But one thing I can say is that nobody died while I was coaching high school football, which happens in the book. Yeah.
Have you had any fear of, because of these, like I said, I've not read the stories yet, I apologize. Is there any fear of litigation or things have come up, and this kind of maybe what she's mentioned about political issues?
Yeah.
That, and obviously, or is that even an issue? Obviously, we've got freedom of speech, but.
I think you can probably get sued for anything these days, And so, the publisher they have a legal team who read everything before it goes out, and we have discussions about, is this or that or what. But I mean, like I said with my column, you know, that's 500 to 700 words every week that go out that somebody could take arms with. So, you know, what's the old, you enter the arena, you know, the old, and that's what you do when you put a piece of art out in the world. And so, yeah.
It's going to get warm flying close to the sun.
Yeah, that's it.
And I have to, before we go, I have to thank you for one other thing, to show you that, because I graduated from Mountain Home High School in 1981. Bomber, that's right. And just to show you that petty rivalries don't die in Arkansas, you know, our arch rival when I was there, the Harrison Goblins.
Yeah.
They're in different conferences, different levels now. But in Don't Know Tough, the Harrison Goblins lose 35-0. Thank you for doing that.
Well, you want to know why they lost? Because when I was a football coach, I was a big part of the reason I became an author is because I became a head football coach when I was 26 years old, head coach of Clarksville. And in those 2 seasons that I was there, we lost more games than I'd lost in my whole playing career. We went 1-19 in 2 seasons. And I just was completely not ready. I got the job because of my playing career. And I just didn't realize that being a head football coach at 5A football was like being the sheriff, the mayor, and a youth pastor, like all tied into, you know, like one job. And Harrison beat us like 72-0 up in Harrison. It was like the worst. And
Was that Tommy Tice? Was he
no,
the coach?
it wasn't
He's
Tommy
gone?
Tice. No, it wasn't. I won't name names, but I did not forget that. You know, so that's one thing. And John Grisham, I remember he did a series, really interesting podcast where, you know, he doesn't do book tours, he doesn't do stuff anymore because it's a big headache, I think, for him at this point. But he said, you know, he's got a great quote. One of the greatest things about fiction is you can line them up and you can shoot them down. You know, like you get it, because it's all just a story anyway, you know.
Well, I took too much glee in that 35-0 thrashing.
Yes.
Be sure to read all 3. He'll be signing books. Eli Cranor, thank
Thanks
you
so much,
much.
Kyle.
Appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Thank you for coming.
It's great, man.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.